Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're looking at something pretty unusual information that, well, sort of critiques itself right from the start.
Exactly. We've got this source, a supposed telepathic dive into the election of a new pope, Robert Francis Prevost, who's being called Pope Leo XIV, maybe XV.
But the twist is, the source itself gives this big disclosure, a kind of warning label about how to take this kind of research. It's fascinating.
It really is. So we're not just exploring the claims, the details of the session. We're also getting this meta layer, this advice from the source on how reliable it all is.
Like getting a map and the legend, but the legend also says, warning, map may be inaccurate.
Aha, yeah, something like that.
So our mission today is really twofold. We'll dig into the actual content, the surprising facts from the session. And then we'll use the source's own guidance to think critically about, well, how much weight to give it. Ready to jump in?
Let's do it.
Okay, so first, the setup. How did this telepathic session even happen?
Well, the source describes two facilitators trained at the Grifasi Academy. One's in Germany, the other's in Canada.
Right, and they're working with someone called an external hypno operator. Lisbeth?
Yes, Lisbeth. And apparently a key part of their protocol is that she has no idea what the topic is beforehand. She just goes into this relaxed, connected state.
Interesting. So she's like a clear channel, theoretically.
Theoretically, yes.
Yeah.
That's the idea. And her first task, even before the Pope was officially elected, was to try and perceive the etheric DNA of Robert Francis Prevost.
His energetic signature, basically.
Kind of, yeah, his blueprint. And what she saw was pretty wild.
Tell us.
She described this two-spiral structure, very dynamic, dark, spinning really fast, and it seemed to stretch out like infinitely into the universe. No beginning, no end.
Wow. Okay. That's quite a visual. An infinite spinning helix.
Definitely sets an esoteric tone right away. But then something even stranger happens.
Oh.
As she's watching this DNA, suddenly the image of Pope John Paul II pops into her vision.
John Paul II just appears.
Yeah. And he's described as laughing, charismatic. And then there's this quick, almost throwaway mention linking him to a spy they talked about before the session even started.
A spy. Intriguing. So layers upon layers already.
Exactly. And then the vision shifts again from John Paul II to a lion.
A lion. Okay, where's this going?
Not just any lion. It has a full mane, and one paw or arm is holding up a sphere. And this lion is supposedly connected to both Popes John Paul II and the new one, Prevost.
Holding a sphere like the world.
We'll get to that. But first, this lion has a name.
It has a name.
Yes, Pius.
Pius. Like Pope Pius.
The connection isn't explicitly drawn to a specific Pope Pius in this part, but the name itself is significant. And what Pius the Lion says is, well, it's quite something.
Go on.
It declares things like, we are the same, we are all the same, we are all power, we are in the all, we live in the all, we control the all. It talks about gnashing teeth, expressing, laughing, liking to play, claims it comes from the all, from the sun.
So this isn't just symbolism. It's presented as an entity, a consciousness, claiming total power and control.
Precisely. A fundamental force.
Okay, so we have the DNA, John Paul II, the spy hint, Pius the Lion. What about the actual election? Lisbeth was asked to view that too, right? On a metaphysical level.
Yes. She describes the scene. A huge room, massive long table, about 20 figures there, black robes, red caps, all intensely focused on someone at the head of the table.
And who's that?
Get this. It looked like Pope John Paul II again.
Again?
Like a hologram. Everyone there perceived him. He seemed to grow enormous and fade in and out. A shimmering presence.
A hologram of John Paul II at the Metaphysical Election Council. Why was he there?
The session claims it was because of his charisma. There was a desire for a leader who could, move masses, and they wanted to channel that kind of energy.
And this hologram, it spoke.
Apparently, yes. It supposedly announced who the new pope should be.
And this hologram was Pius the Lion.
That's what the session identifies it as. The John Paul II figure is Pius, the embodiment of power. And that sphere the lion was holding?
Yeah.
Explicitly identified as the world, held in their power.
Wow. Okay. So the election, metaphysically, was orchestrated by this power entity, Pius, appearing as John Paul II, choosing the successor.
That's the picture painted. And these attendees, these figures in robes, they were skilled in energy work, able to communicate with, as the source puts it, the dead who are not dead to manifest this hologram.
It's a very potent image of esoteric control.
It is. But then there's another really strange, almost uncomfortable detail.
What's that?
Pope Francis, the recently deceased one, referred to as Panchito. He was apparently there too.
In the vision. But why?
According to the session, he was basically being ignored. And the reason given is pretty stark. They, presumably the figures or pious, wanted to make him feel useless, like a fool, a puppet without power.
That sounds cruel.
It does. They wanted to compare him negatively to the force of John Paul II explicitly to make him suffer. He's described as looking repentant, tired, just wanting to leave.
So not just an election, but some kind of metaphysical power play and settling of scores, too.
Seems like it, based on this account. It adds a really dark dimension to the scene.
Definitely. Okay, so after the election scene, did the session look into Prevost himself more?
Yeah.
His background, his plans?
Yes, it shifted to his past life and what they called his future agenda.
And his past life was, don't tell me, another pope.
Not quite. According to the session, Pope Leo XIV, Robert Prevost, was previously an Argentine comedian named Paco.
A comedian? Seriously?
Yep, from the 1840s, 1840 to 1848 specifically. Played the guitar. They apparently observed his death and transition in that life during the session.
From comedian to pope? That's quite a leap.
Well, the connection is made through his pre-incarnation state. He was seen as waiting, and the conditions for his papacy were set by what the source calls subliminal contracts.
Subliminal contracts, like soul agreements.
Sort of. Pre-life agreements, or maybe inherent traits destined for this path. These included a desire for power and money, his charisma linked back to the music, the guitar from his comedian life, his eyes and smile being tools for attraction, and a manipulative nature.
So he was chosen or contracted because he had these specific useful qualities for the role.
That's the idea, almost like he was pre-qualified. And looking forward, the session predicts rivals for his time as pope.
Oh, like internal church politics?
No, actually Buddhism and yoga.
Buddhism and yoga as rivals to the pope. Why?
Because of changing mentalities globally. People are shifting, and his plan, supposedly, is to adapt or co-opt some of their teachings.
Adapt to them, like integrate them.
More like absorb them strategically. The session dismissively calls it the same dirt, just a little game. So not a genuine embrace, more a tactic.
Tactical adaptation. Okay. And the name he chose, Leo XIV, was that tactical too?
Highly calculated, according to this source. The name Leo itself wasn't seen as having a strong inherent vibrational root yet. It was described as latent, a blank page, waiting for him to write on it, to give it meaning through his actions.
So the name itself is waiting to be defined by him.
Kind of. There's this analogy of a tree. Other popes form the thin roots, the structure, but the trunk is only half formed, waiting for him. And he allegedly chose Leo specifically because the lion means strength, power.
Back to the lion symbolism.
Exactly. It's easily understood, easily assimilated by society, and that gives him energy and force. It was a strategic branding choice, understood through those contracts we mentioned.
Less divine inspiration, more marketing and energy harvesting.
That's certainly the framing here, which leads to the idea of prophecy. Was this election foretold?
What did the session say about that?
Interestingly, no, not necessarily tied to a specific direct prophecy. It's seen more as part of repeating cycles, like having another Leo pope, similar to Leo XIII. Prophecy themselves are framed as creations made by the masses.
Creations made by the masses. So collective belief makes them real.
That's the implication. That those in charge, these shadowy figures perhaps, they read the atmosphere, they understand societal needs or desires, and they adapt. They choose names like Francisco for mercy when that's needed, or Leo for strength now.
It sounds very pragmatic, almost cynical, especially given the context they mention, falling church attendance, less money coming in.
It paints a picture of a system trying to maintain relevance and control. And reincarnating popes, the source claims, are aware of all this. Everything is prepared.
Prepared how?
They have access to all sorts of information, political, religious, economic, social. They hold power over the all, connections to entities. The whole thing is presented as a pretty little game of structured, manipulated control.
A game. And how do world leaders fit into this game post-election?
According to the session, they're largely indifferent to the Pope's name. They see it all as part of the game, too. In fact, they supposedly prefer division, not religious unity. Divide and conquer benefits them more.
That's a bleak view of geopolitics.
It is, and it contrasts sharply with what the session observes in society more broadly.
Which is?
A global awakening. People seeking peace, realizing religion can sometimes divide and manipulate, even if the core ethics are shared.
So a disconnect between the populace and the leaders, and maybe the institution itself.
Seems so. And the prediction is that churches will have to adapt, find new methodologies of attraction to keep people engaged.
Okay, so given this complex backdrop, what kind of pope will Leo XIV actually be? Will he just follow the script?
Well, the session says there is a plan, guidelines from whoever is directing him, but he apparently has a very strong desire to impose himself.
Impose himself how?
Over the guidelines, over the directors, constantly asserting himself, here I am above you, you elected me, obey me.
A power struggle within the power structure.
Looks like it. And the prediction is that he'll actually succeed. He will impose himself, especially over politicians.
So a very dominant, assertive pontificate is expected.
That's the forecast. And then there were a few other sort of darker esoteric bits that came up.
Oh, like what?
Just a brief mention of Pope Pius XII being very dark, connected somehow to World War II, representing maybe a return or an association with a war. It was quite cryptic.
Another pious link. And what else?
This one is really chilling. The papal embalming process.
Yeah. What about it?
Described as an esoteric ritual designed to cage them.
Cage them. You mean their souls, their energy.
Their energies, yes, and any entities associated with them. The idea is to prevent them from leaving the Vatican's sphere of influence, even after death, trapped in the game but unable to leave.
Wow, that is a disturbing thought. Continuous control, even post-mortem.
It really is, and it reinforces the final point. Papal selection is prepared. Candidates fit conditions, maybe fearfully volunteer, but it's orchestrated. A little race run by these entities or groups.
Okay, let me just process that for a second. Past life, comedian, metaphysical holograms, Pius the Power Lion, caged energies.
Yeah.
It's an absolutely extraordinary narrative.
It is, and we've just laid out the core claims from that first part of the source, the telepathic investigation itself.
Right, but now we need to shift gears, because the same source then gives us this massive disclaimer, this whole section, explaining why this kind of information is inherently tricky.
This is where it gets really meta and, I think, really important for anyone exploring these kinds of topics. The Grifasi team themselves step forward and talk about the nature of hypnotic information.
And their main point is?
Their central premise is quite blunt. Research sessions do not exist in the way people often imagine, and information from a single hypnosis session, like the one we just discussed, is considered extremely contaminated.
Extremely contaminated. Why? By their own admission.
Yeah. They explain it's because of the information's journey. It starts at a source, okay, but then it has to travel through many dimensions, many densities, many minds or consciousnesses.
So it's like a game of cosmic telephone.
Exactly. And along the way, it's vulnerable to interception. Beings or entities can distort it intentionally or just by their nature. The message gets warped.
Okay, interception. What else contaminates it?
The hypnotized person themselves, their own beliefs, mentality, perspectives, opinions, all of that can color the information coming through. It's not a perfectly clear window.
Right, the observer effect almost.
Sort of. And crucially, they point out if the person or topic being investigated, like, say, the Pope has no connection to the hypnotic session or doesn't somehow authorize the information flow, well, the real information probably won't come through.
And what happens then?
Entities can jump in. They can pretend to be someone else, invent stuff, feed disinformation for their own reasons. It exploits the vacuum.
That makes sense. So this is why they draw a line between client sessions and research sessions.
Precisely. With a client, you usually have their explicit permission, their authorization. That allows for work directly related to them. But for general research on a topic or person who hasn't consented, it's wide open to these contamination issues.
Which brings us to their standard for real research then. If single sessions are so flawed, how do they find reliable information?
This is where they use the gold nugget analogy.
Panning for gold.
Exactly. To get reliable data, they say you need hundreds or even thousands of sessions, all using the exact same questions, the same protocol, focused on the same topic.
Wow, hundreds or thousands. That's a huge undertaking.
It is. You collect enormous amounts of sand, all the potentially contaminated data from all those sessions, and you sift through it looking for the very few gold nuggets.
And the nuggets are?
The bits of information that show up consistently again and again and again across many independent sessions, that commonality is what gives it weight.
Can you give an example?
They mention information about, say, reptilian or insectoid interferences. They consider that reliable only because it has apparently emerged in thousands and thousands of sessions globally using similar methods. It's the sheer volume and consistency.
Okay, so repeated patterns across vast numbers of sessions is the key.
Yes. Contrast that with a very specific detail, like their example of a specific house in 1452 New York. If that only came up in one session, They'd consider it highly likely to be contaminated, unreliable.
So applying that logic back to the Pope Leo XIV session,
Yeah.
all those specific details about Paco, the comedian, Pius the lion, the hologram, since they come from just this one described session.
According to the source's own criteria, you'd have to classify them as potentially highly contaminated. Interesting, maybe, but not verifiable gold nuggets based on their methodology.
That is a really crucial piece of self-awareness from the source. It completely reframes how we should approach everything we just heard in the first
It absolutely does. It forces you, the listener, to hold both things at once, the compelling narrative and the source's own caution about its potential unreliability.
So what's the big takeaway here? How should you, listening now, process all this? Especially when the source itself warns you.
I think the core lesson is about discernment. Being well-informed, especially with unconventional sources, isn't just about absorbing the story. It's about understanding the process behind the story, the potential pitfalls, the built-in filters and distortions.
It's like needing to understand the instrument just as much as the music it produces.
That's a great way to put it. This source gives us both the music, the Pope's story, and a detailed look at the hypnotic method and its limitations. It really challenges you to think critically about how you evaluate information, especially the more esoteric stuff.
Okay, so let's try to wrap this up. We went deep into this really wild, detailed account of Pope Leo XIV's election, his past, his future, these metaphysical dramas.
Absolutely fascinating, almost like a screenplay.
Right. But then, crucially, we looked at the source's own disclosure, its warning about contaminated information from single sessions, and the rigorous process needed for anything approaching reliable research in their view.
It's that second part that really adds the depth, I think. It demonstrates that critical thinking isn't about dismissing unusual information outright, but about understanding its context, its origins, its potential flaws.
We got to see both sides of the coin, the incredible claim, and the cautionary note about how the claim was generated.
Which really leads to the final thought, doesn't it? In this age where we're just flooded with information from all sides, traditional and less traditional.
And where even the sources themselves sometimes say, hey, be careful with this.
Yeah. What does it really mean to find truth? How do you personally decide what to believe, what to question, what to hold lightly, especially with material like this that exists outside the usual boundaries? How do you keep an open mind, but also keep your critical thinking switched on?
That balancing act, that's the ongoing challenge, isn't it? Something to definitely keep pondering.